16th, 2019. Looking to council for disclosure of pecuniary interests and the general nature thereof. Seeing none. I'll look to approval of minutes for the June 17th FSP meeting, moved by Councillor Freeman, seconded by Councillor Hanmer. All those in favor? That's carried. And we have a few delegations today. First up is Impact, the International Theatre Festival. So I'll ask, as I see folks just mid-drink, I'll ask Pam and Emily to come up and extol the virtues and the impact that will be felt in this region over the next few days.
Is this good? Okay, great. Thank you for having us here this afternoon. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Pam Patel, and I'm the Artistic Director of local theater company MT Space. As you may know, our biennial International Theater Festival, Impact 19, will be happening soon from September 24th to the 29th, taking over the downtown Kitchener core to bring high-caliber productions from Tunisia, Iran, Mexico, Ecuador, across Canada, as well as showcasing local work, including our very own production, Amal. I stand here today to personally invite and encourage you all to attend this award-winning festival that has helped to put Waterloo region on the theater map. But this isn't the only reason that we're here this afternoon. We want to raise awareness on how much our organization has grown. Impact 19 is an example of how Empty Space has expanded over the past 15 years into an organization that has become a home for artists, tells marginalized narratives to foster a belonging community, and is now an integral part of this region. We are in an exciting and crucial time as we go from being a small company to a mid-sized organization that creates, produces, presents, and incubates work within this community and exports it worldwide. In 2017, if you don't know, we found a home and relocated to Waterloo at First United Church, which has given us the physical space, infrastructure, and the resources to support our artistic associates and community partners, such as work and rehearsal space, grant writing, and admin support, as well as continue to grow our own operations. As our artistic output and offerings grow, so does our community, and we found ourselves increasingly playing the role of an incubator in this region, a necessary role that is required to enrich the local arts ecology so that by supporting big ideas by artists and ad hoc groups, we elevate the wider community. As we look to our future, we have our own dream of fulfilling our role as an incubator of socially conscious work, while expanding our team to support this vision and the work we do. At this time, I'd like to introduce a new member to our Empty Space team, our Impact Festival producer, Emily Jung.
Hello, it's nice to meet you. I studied arts management at the University of Toronto with a special interest on community outreach and equity and not-for-profit arts management. I've always loved working for festivals. For example, I come from Toronto International Festival of Authors at Harbourfront Centre. And my experience producing the Impact Festival this year has been incredibly inspiring. As we prepare for this festival, Pam and I had a chance to discuss how much Empty Space has grown and where it is in the community today, and so we'd just like to share that with you. We started from a company that produced one show in 2004. By 2011, we were an organization with an operational budget of $380,000. This year, our operating budget is $570,000. That's after the funding cut of $85,000. $85,000. 2 years ago, Canada Council for the Arts recognized Empty Space's achievement and awarded a core funding of $150,000 a year for 3 years. This is the third year of this core funding, which enables us to apply for an increase of this operational budget to continue growing the organization. I want to highlight this grant further, as we're now in the Artistic Catalyst category, which Canada Council for the Arts describe as arts organizations that play a pivotal role in nurturing artistic practices and respond to the evolution of creative communities across Canada. This is a recognition that Empty Space has become an asset to the arts ecology at a national level. I believe we're the only theater company in Waterloo region that receives this level of core funding. Further, I'm happy to let you know that last week, Canadian Heritage let us know that they're increasing our project funding from $80,000 to $108,000, recognizing the importance of the Impact Festival. As well, delegates from the Canadian Heritage and Canada Council for the Arts are visiting Kitchener-Waterloo to attend this unique and stunning shows at the Impact Festival. I've always had a special interest on the community outreach and the impact of arts on its local community. I began studying arts management when West Queen West, or some of you may recognize it as Parkdale, area was rapidly gentrifying. I remember Parkdale area at the stage of development as grassroots festivals and artist-run centers began actively taking form. Today, West Queen West is home to a vibrant community of artists, innovative new restaurants and stores featuring emerging fashion designers. From Purple soft-serve ice creams to Artscape's annual Zine Festival, if you want to be in the know, then you take 20 minutes Queen Street streetcar down from the heart of downtown core to go to West Queen West. One of the organizations that found a home in the vitalization stages of West Queen West is the Theatre Center. Pam and I found similarities between the Theatre Center and Empty Space. Naturally, we began looking closely at the history of the Theatre Center and find inspiration in their success. The Theatre Center found their venue in 2012 at West Queen West. The City of Toronto leases its Heritage Building, renovated to hold a theatre of up to 190 seats. The Theatre Center is the organizer of a biennial 7A11D festival similar to Impact, and they're also known for their residency program that incubates and produces theatre, which is what we do year-round. The size of our company is similar to the Theatre Center, which they found when they found their venue in 2012. With this in mind, our strategic vision for upcoming years will be to create connections in the region, especially the tech sector, to increase our fundraising capacities to grow the organization further. We already demonstrated this potential as our crowdfunding campaign recently for the Impact Festival hit $20,000 in our goal. Additionally, an anonymous donor contributing $20,000 to bring back our production Amal to Impact Festival.
In 2016, I had the opportunity to participate in Arts Build's Arts Facilities Mentoring Network, where arts leaders are paired with venued organizations to mentor in building and maintaining capital projects. Coincidentally, I was paired with Franco Boni, the artistic director of the Theatre Center in Toronto, who helped to renovate and build their facility. Through this mentorship, I was able to learn each and every step the Theatre Center took to not only create their bricks and mortar space, but also how they became venue managers as well. I learned about their challenges and successes in depth, and most importantly, I learned how we are similar. When the Theatre Center received the old Carnegie Library to renovate into a theatre, they were a similar-sized organization to us, in their staff size, their activities, and even how much they were able to fundraise every year. The Theatre Center is my personal inspiration and motivation for where empty space can grow, and what it can become in this community. It's become a very special place for artists in Queen West, and as Emily mentioned, played a key role in economic development in that part of Toronto. I encourage you to look up the Theatre Center, and if you're interested in chatting more about what I learned from my mentorship, I would love to share my notes with you. We share this with you because it's time for us to talk about our next steps together. We have big dreams to continue to expand our activities and partnerships so that we can engage in more on-the-ground, meaningful community arts projects, offer more workshops to foster arts appreciation, present theater pieces to other sectors to help shed light on diversity and inclusion issues, and provide programming for newcomer youth so that we are empowering young leaders of today. We want to be able to employ even more artists on a consistent basis through all of our activities, including creating and touring our work, so that we give them a reason to stay in Waterloo region and call this place home. And we aim to grow our staff to attract talent to this community, like Emily, who we kind of stole from Toronto. Our next steps as we plan for this future is to become an organization like the Theatre Center, where we too can have a space that artists can call home and create, where we can program world-class theater and partner with socially conscious organizations, a space that we can offer to this community at accessible and affordable rates while developing a business model that helps increase Empty Space's own sustainability and consistent revenue generation and employment of artists and staff. This is our mid to long-term goal. So we want you to dream with us too. Experience the work that we do, the impact that we have on this community, and the recognition that we are receiving nationally and now internationally. Come to Impact and see how this community has come together to support a festival and an organization who has demonstrated their resilience after losing $85,000 in funding. Engage in conversations with the delegations who will be coming from Canada Council for the Arts, Canadian Heritage, Manitoba Arts Council, and Ontario Presents, and learn what sets us apart from other parts of the province and the country. I actually learned the other day that the Deputy Minister of Canadian Heritage is going to be attending our festival because we are being seen as being at the forefront of what Canadian programming should look like. We're being innovative in a lot of areas, and theatre is one of them. Our opening ceremonies will be on September 24th at 6 p.m. at the museum, followed by our opening night performance of Fears by the National Theatre of Tunisia in the Conrad Center. I invite you all to attend the Impact opening ceremonies with a complimentary ticket on us. We invite you to take this opportunity to experience where we are now and have a conversation about where we can go together. So thank you for hearing us today. I hope to see many of you at Impact, and I look forward to following up with each of you after the festival.
Thank you very much, Pam, and welcome, Emily, to the community as well. It's good to meet you, and this is a setting where you can see all of us very quickly. And very exciting news, Pam, but I'll let councillors who have questions go ahead. Councillor Veith?
Through you, Chair Henry, thank you. And congratulations, ladies, on all your success, and welcome to your office space in Waterloo. It amazes me how First United Church just squeezes everything in. There's so much going on there, so congrats on that. I just wondered, where are most of your performances, and are there any within the city of Waterloo coming up in this 2019 festival?
So Impact is currently based in the Kitchener Core for this year, but what we've done in the past is we've had some programming in Waterloo, and we've tried shuttling our patrons back and forth across the border, so to speak. It's something we'd like to continue to do because in the past we also partnered with the Indigenous Students Association and the powwow, and it was great for our out-of-town guests to experience that. So this year, unfortunately, because of our limited resources, we're not doing that, but ideally, way back, if I were to explain the original vision of the festival, it was a traveling festival, actually, where 1 year it's in Kitchener, 1 year it's in Waterloo, and 1 year it'd even be in Cambridge. So I don't know if we'll get there, but, that's like a very long-term vision. Yeah.
Sorry, if I could just add, part of our challenge this year organizing the Impact Festival was around venues. So the Kitchener Core has venues like the Conrad Center and the Registry Theatre that could house productions that we're bringing at that scale. So that was one of the challenges we were having. So this dream of us coming up with another small theatre that really could be anywhere in the region, it would really help our festival grow as well.
Through you, Chair Henry, I also wanted to say thank you for coming and congratulations on what you have already built. As a side note, I used to live in Parkdale, so way to go, bringing that little bit of Toronto edginess out this way. But I'm just curious, can you give us a bit of an idea of the audiences that are coming to your festival and kind of the people that you are reaching and the people you're hoping to reach?
Okay, well, our audiences kind of reflect where our profile has elevated over the past years. So we get quite a delegation of artists from across the country coming to the festival, and now funders, as you heard. We also have some international guests, and we do have local patrons that are of a wide, diverse, coming from a diverse demographic in age and in background. But what we would like is to further elevate the local profile of Empty Space and Impact. This year, we're seeing a little bit of an increase of awareness on a local level of our festival, but what we'd really love is to come out after a show and see that the city is aware that this International Theatre Festival is happening. And so it helps to have business partners in hotels and restaurants, but It'd be great to also look at partnerships down the road with like tourism and maybe even the municipalities, and see how we can just kind of further the reach within our own communities of what this festival is all about.
Thank you through the chair, and thank you for presenting at the region the other day. I did have a chance to look at the theater center and that, and good to hear the story. And I really do think everybody should look at that, because that is such a doable vision. It really seems like it really came across as that. And while you're doing your presentation here today, I see you have board member Rob in the background, and never once did he flinch when you were talking about your vision. So that's good to see that you have board support for all that you do. And I think just hearing that you have provincial, or what you said, deputy minister, provincial or
Canadian Heritage.
Canadian Heritage.
Federal, yeah.
That's we're really on to something here, and thank you for all that you do, and thank you for the excitement that you two bring to this community and to Empty Space. Thank you.
Anyone else? Well, thank you for coming and letting us know of what excitement awaits in just over a week's time. I would say you have 7 or 8 sleeps left, but I don't know that that's actually an accurate count of all of the work that I know you and the team have been putting into to making sure that this biennial is going to be that much more successful than the last one, and that despite the change in funding trajectory that was imposed upon you this year, that the change in trajectory that you're focused on in terms of a vision is nothing but up into bigger and better things, and looking forward to seeing how we can all be a part of that conversation. So thanks for coming in, and all the best next week.
Thank you.
Next up, we have the, speaking of cultural events, we have the Royal Medieval Fair. So we can sort of twirl into our Wayback Machine and let these folks come up and tell us what that's going to be all about.
Hello, yes, I am Queen Charlotte, and I am here from the Royal Medieval Fair. This is Mary Contrary here beside me. The fair is this Saturday from 11 o'clock until 6 o'clock at Waterloo Park West, and we're here to thank the City of Waterloo for being one of our sponsors for 22 years. It's been a long, long time. It's been much appreciated. As part of our thanks, we have invitations for you that we would like to hand out or hand over to someone, whoever would like to take them. The theme this year, as you can imagine, after 22 years, we have generations of people who are involved in the fair. And I should add, everyone involved in the fair is completely volunteering their time. All the actors, all the organizers, all the supporters, it's all volunteer time. So it takes up a great deal of their community time, but we very much appreciate it, and very much appreciate the support from the City of Waterloo. And as I say, it's become generational. We now have generations of people involved, children and their parents and their grandparents, all have coming out to be part of the fair. It's quite a wonderful event. I hope to see you all there. I know I will be seeing your very dashing mayor there in a period costume on Saturday. Yes?
And everything.
Oh, it's lovely. It's larger than my crowd. I don't know. I appreciate that. So I think that's really all I came here to say.
Thank you very much, Queen Charlotte. And does Lord Mayor Jaworski have anything he'd like to add?
That has a ring to it, Councillor. That sounds good. It is such a wonderful event. Each and every year the place is packed. It's so accessible by active transportation. Easy, just the place is full. I don't know who eats those big turkey drumsticks, but they seem to be very contrary. It seems to be very, very, very popular there, and just so many family-friendly activities to do. The shops that are there, the nights, and the activities there. Those are
Sword
good.
fighting tournaments.
Yeah, it's and all the fun you can do with the, what's that catapult called? The trebuchet?
Trebuchet, yes.
Trebuchet, yes. Get a chance to play with that. So wonderful. Looking forward to it again, and I will see you just before 11 on Saturday.
I might add, it is very family-oriented, and a family of 4 can enter with the cost of $20. Where else would you see a family of 4 entering an event for $20? And once you're inside, everything is free unless you want to buy food or buy something from a vendor. So hope to see you all there. Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming. It's good to know that the voluntary sector and the tradition goes back a very long ways in Waterloo and Waterloo Park. So I know we'll appreciate being able to check that out this weekend. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
And our third delegation involves a matter that is quite a lot more serious. I'm just sort of looking for, I know we've got delegations on item that Councillor Vasic was going to read. The procedure here is we'll take the delegations and then we'll take the motion? Okay. Because it's in delegations, that works the opposite way that we would normally treat it. So, Fauzia, Sarah, please go ahead at your leisure.
Hello, good morning, Council. Thank you so much for having us. My name is Sarah Shafiq. I'm the project coordinator of Together Against Islamophobia with the Coalition of Muslim Women. And yeah, it is a serious matter. After the festivals, the 2 amazing festivals that we just learned about. So I'll introduce a little bit about what we're talking about. The bill, Quebec's bill C, Bill 21. So this is an act that. So Bill 21 is an act respecting the laicity, the secular character of the state, and it targets religious minorities, particularly Muslim women. It prohibits a wide range of state employees from wearing visible religious symbols, such as the hijab, Jewish kippah, Sikh turban, and bars Muslim women who wear the niqab or face covering from receiving vital public services, including healthcare and education. CAQ's proposed legislation prohibits the wearing of religious symbols by state employees in so-called positions of authority, including tens of thousands of public school teachers, as well as the principals, vice principals of primary, secondary schools, police officers, prison guards, crown prosecutors, government lawyers, as well as the heads of many public bodies. Bill 21 in its current form includes amendments to allow for surveillance and discipline mechanisms to enforce the law, measures that opposition critics in Quebec have called secular policing. It also doubles down on pre-existing legislation that requires citizens to uncover their faces when accessing public services like municipal transit and the court system. And in order to prevent this new legislation from being challenged in court for contravening Canada's Charter of Rights and Freedoms, the government has invoked the Notwithstanding Clause, a constitutional measure that allows provinces to overrule the Charter. So Quebec's Bill 21 has 10 years of Islamophobic history of going after Muslims. Coalition of Muslim Women is connected with that trajectory through Quebec's Bill 98 that first sought to penalize Muslim women wearing the face covering. 10 years ago, we saw no one taking any stand to oppose it, and that propelled local Muslim women in Waterloo region to come together, raise our own voices. So CMW, Coalition Muslim Women, is deeply concerned with Quebec's actions, and we have seen how in 10 years, the scope has broadened from targeting a handful of Muslim women who cover their faces to now all those wearing religious symbols. So that scope has grown. And it's important for me, as someone who's been consistently working over the past 7 years, to raise awareness about Islamophobic hate crimes, particularly against Muslim women, and the impact of these crimes on the targets. Hateful rhetoric from systems of power, especially political systems, state, sends a very strong green light signal to individuals to act on their hate. Right? If it's coming from the political state, then that says that, okay, go ahead, this is all right. At the same time, it sends a very strong red light signal to those targeted. It tells their others that they can't look up to the state to protect them. And how would a Muslim woman go to the police to seek help for her safety when the same government will enforce her to remove her clothing, right? So there's that aspect. So even with such barriers, Quebec's advocacy groups like Justice Femme are reporting a clear spike in harassment directed at Muslim women. People yelling at them, attempting to pull their hijabs, even striking one woman who wears a niqab. There's been more than 40 reported cases since Bill 21 has been passed. So this bill is creating a climate of intolerance and a climate of division, a climate then that puts certain people at risk. Latest hate crime statistics, that's also mentioned in the motion as well, from Stats Canada show that attacks against Muslims have jumped 207% in Ontario and almost tripled in Quebec. So the thing is that this law has sets a precedent. It took Quebec 10 years to pass this law, and now if another local or provincial government decides to enact such a law, it has some, support for it, it will have a blueprint and it can be done much easily and quickly. We know that there is a rise of hate groups all over Canada, including here in Waterloo region. And these hate groups and others who support such groups see what is happening in Quebec. Anti-Muslim sentiment is prevalent as well, with the anti-immigration, especially around immigration, and such laws that target a minority emboldens others across Canada. So all state levels have to unequivocally send a clear message that such actions are unacceptable in our community. So lastly, we hope that the passage of this motion will generate a movement and a conversation on this very concerning issue for Canada. City of Kitchener passed a unanimous motion opposing Bill 21, and we hope that this council also passes a unanimous motion, not just for our own community members, but to encourage other municipalities to take action and, have that opposition. Thank you.
Through you, Chair Henry. So one of the things that we have heard a lot is it's in Quebec, and Quebec just does what they want. For someone who is, someone as a member of the community who is at the receiving end, or as we probably say, target of this very discriminatory piece of legislation, that sounds like Quebec is not part of Canada. It's Canada. So when the rights that are protected in Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms are at stake in any parts of Canada, it's actually a responsibility of everybody who calls this beautiful country their home to stand up in any form of shape, whatever responsibilities they have, whatever status that they have, and whatever small or big action that they can take. So it's very important. The other piece to remember is that, as Sarah mentioned, that yes, it might be in Quebec, not over here, but Quebec, how far Quebec is from here. The law is already setting a precedent. We have already seen how the change in government in our own province can, how quickly it can change the policies and the processes and, the legislations. The Notwithstanding Clause can be used very, very easily. So we have to remember that. And then the other piece is it's actually impacting Muslim women here locally. So someone like me, I came here 19 years ago, and my profession at that time was teaching. And before coming over here, I had a lot of fears. Fear about finding an employment was probably the biggest fear. I had a lot of things like, I might not find employment because I don't have Canadian experience, language, credentials, everything. But never did I thought about that I wouldn't get a job because I wear something which other people don't wear. Right? So this law is creating another barrier, so all of the other barriers that I talked about, I could have overcome it. I could go back to school, I can get the education, I can improve my English. But when you ask me to remove a piece of clothing that I think is a part of who I am, then you're asking a lot, right? So that's another piece to remember, that it's not far away, and it has very, very living here. If the least we can say is the anxiety that people feel right now, the concern, and the muted response that our community has seen in general from Canadian civil society about this law. So imagine if it was a law trying to take away the rights of any other of the population. The response is creating a lot more anxiety. So as itself calls it religious symbol. So for example, this hijab, they have taken the freedom to define it as a religious symbol. It's not a religious symbol for me. You can't tell me what this piece of clothing means for me. It's not a religious symbol for me. Just like every other woman and man in this room, when you wake up every morning and you are trying to get ready for wherever you want to go and spend your day, you make a decision about you want to wear. I make a choice in the way that I dress every single day. Going to have the opportunity based on the choice in terms of what we want to wear every day. It's a direct affront, it's a direct attack on women's right to choose what they want to wear. So yesterday, Sarah and I attended a very long, intensive training on active bystander, and we learned about target, we learn about, passive or active bystander, and we learn about harm doer or the act of harm doing. So one thing that we learned is that an active bystander can choose to approach the target or approach the harm doer, try to support the target, or try to stop the harm doer from doing the harm. If this council, I hope that this council would go in the direction where it can both support the target in this case, so women like me in this community, in Ontario, in Canada, and also play their role in helping the harm doer to understand that what they're doing is not right, by sending a message, by standing up for what's wrong, by standing up for defending the constitutional right of every Canadian for religious freedom. And I think this would be the best resolution that we could look for, and I hope that this will come unanimously from this council. Thank you. We are here if you have any questions.
Thank you, Vazia. Are there questions for the delegates? Seeing none, thank you. Next up we have, sorry, I turned my page. Next up we have Michael Clifton, steering committee member from Interfaith Grand River. Michael, at your leisure.
Thank you. Well, it's nice to be here at your event for a change. We always see you guys out at our events, so that's great. Yeah, Mike Clifton. Some of you know me just on paper, I think. I'm a condominium developer. I also run the Strummerfest Music Festival, and I'm a lay minister. So in all of those capacities, I've met some of you here and there at different times. Today, I'm speaking to you on behalf of Interfaith Grand River. I'm a member of its steering committee. For your background information, Interfaith Grand River was formed by strange coincidence on September 13th, 2001, 2 days after the day we now know as 9/11. The coming together of representatives of Muslim, Christian, Jewish, and Unitarian faith groups, as well as other traditions, had been planned for a long while beforehand, but you can imagine that was a very daunting first meeting 2 days after that event. But it wasn't daunting enough to stop it from happening. And the conversation and the friendships that started that day have continued. In fact, last Thursday was, I believe, our 216th meeting of now what's usually 20 to 30 people representing a wide variety of groups in the Waterloo region. We meet not because we're committed to the organization of Interfaith Grand River. It could come or go, and that wouldn't necessarily change life for any of us. But we meet because of the principles that it represents. Principles we believe are today in Canada facing the greatest threat they may have faced ever in this land. Principles such as tolerance, respect, and understanding are clearly under fire. They're missing from much of our public dialogue about politics or social issues. Today, you're being asked to approve a motion that seeks to express and reinforce this city's commitment to those kind of principles. What motivates it at this time is not a desire for any random act of virtue signaling, but a sincere demonstration of commitment to the kind of ideals that are represented throughout our country in a variety of human rights legislation and, of course, in the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Interfaith Grand River encourages you to approve this motion. I'm now going to read the formal statement of the Steering Committee of Interfaith Grand River, which I believe you may have a copy of in your package. The members of Interfaith Grand River, IGR, expressed shock and dismay upon the introduction and subsequent passage into law of Quebec's Bill 21, an act respecting the laicity of the state, or commonly the secularism law, and the application of the Notwithstanding Clause in order to allow this law to bypass and offend the rights and freedoms of all Canadians enshrined in Sections 2 and 7 to 15 of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. The new law amends Quebec's own Charter of Human Rights and Freedoms and forbids teachers, police, government lawyers, doctors in public hospitals, home child care providers whose services are funded by government subsidies, as well as others in positions of authority or employment within the government or other public institutions from wearing any personal religious symbols such as the cross, the kippah, the turban, or the hijab. IGR highly values religious freedom for all people and acknowledges the harm that is caused by Quebec's secularism law to people of many faiths and traditions, including Sikhs, Jews, Muslims, Christians, and others, who choose to practice their faith openly and without suppression. We also recognize that the effect of this law is likely to most significantly impact members of Muslim and Sikh communities, who are often also racial minorities within the populations of Quebec and Canada generally. IGR unequivocally denounces both the substance and intent of this law, under the effects of which we understand that some people, particularly women, of faith have already lost or been denied employment. For nearly 20 years, IGR has remained committed to encouraging and practicing dialogue, partnership, and action amongst people in all our diverse faith, spiritual, and cultural traditions, for the purposes of building greater understanding and a healthier, more inclusive community. IGR believes that human differences complement and enrich our lives together. Therefore, we strive to live harmoniously, to cultivate an environment of tolerance, understanding, respect, trust, and mutual support, and to develop and celebrate awareness of our interdependence. IGR supports the legal challenges against Quebec's secularism law by the National Council of Canadian Muslims, the World Sikh Organization of Canada, and the Canadian Civil Liberties Association, and we encourage others, including municipal and provincial authorities, to do likewise. In closing, I wanted to add just a couple of personal comments, not overly personal, just a couple of additional comments. I mentioned earlier that what you're being asked to do is not virtue signaling. And I make that comment because undoubtedly there will be some people who say that that's all that it is. I encourage you to let that criticism not be true. Let it rather be said that the City of Waterloo is not a signaler, but an exemplar of the virtues that are so vital for the sustaining of a free, open, and tolerant society for all. To that end, I would encourage you to remember that although the motion before you only specifically mentions the Muslim community by name, many other people of many religious traditions can and would be impacted by policies, practices, or legislation like Quebec's Bill 21. Further, I would suggest, if the opportunity is available to you, a minor amendment to the motion, that you consider adding an express denouncement of Quebec's legislation and its intent. It could be as simple as, in the very first resolution, having it read, "Therefore be it resolved, the City of Waterloo denounces the province of Quebec's Bill 21 and the policies of discrimination it represents, and the City of Waterloo reaffirms its commitment," etc. Thank you for your time. I guess I have to stay here for questions, don't I?
Any questions for Michael? Thank you very much for
Thank you.
coming today. I'll look around the council table first to Councillor Vasic. Now would be the time.
Yeah, through you, Chair Henry, can I move up the correspondence and motion now, please? Should I just go? Okay, all right. Well, thank you so much for your presentations. And I'm going to read the motion just as it is so everyone can hear it if they haven't seen it already, and then we can discuss your proposals. So just briefly, though, thank you so much for your leadership on this and for taking the time to reach out to us and talk to us and help us stand global in other provinces in Canada, and I mean internationally, of course, but here, like you said, in this. So thank you so much. I'll just read the motion now. Okay. Whereas, according to a Statistics Canada report, there's been a 206 reported in Ontario. Islamophobia is linked to the region, whereas the province of Quebec has recently passed 21, which this bill directly affects the health, well-being, and sensibility in the Waterloo region. Systemic policies, legislation, and practices in other provinces and communities, such as the province of Ontario and the city of Waterloo. Therefore, be it resolved, the city of Waterloo reaffirms its commitment to compassion, and love. Therefore, be it also resolved, the City of Waterloo is province and provincial advocacy bodies to affirm their commitment to policies, legislation, and practices that promote religious freedom, anti-racism, as well as promote equity, inclusion, and belonging in neighborhoods, communities, and workplaces. Be it finally resolved that this resolution be forwarded to the Honourable Premier of Ontario, local members of Provincial Parliament of Waterloo,
a month or so ago, and you know, I think there's many laws being put forward throughout the world, but I really think that the aspect of the local angle, and to Fozzie about you know, I think local support, where we stand, and also say we all know something like this is not coming to our council table, like the Quebec bill. But by this speaking out, we're saying we are affirming the fact it is nothing like this is ever coming to our council. And if it can buy some an advantage for us as a community, as a council, against people who are out there and they're hateful out there, and knowing that the council, the city of Waterloo, this is not acceptable, not really changes a key, and to get to that, you know, proverbial 100% where everybody is, you know, sense of belonging, equity, inclusion, which is what was very personal to this council when we created our strategic plan. If that by this motion can be done, I think we've done a good thing here today. And letting the province of Ontario know that this is not something that is acceptable as far as we're concerned, letting the Quebec government know this is not something that's acceptable as far as we're concerned, because from an employment standpoint, government should be open to everyone. There should be no check boxes you have to pass before you can apply qualification. There's something his place to this conversation.
Thank you. Through you, Chair Henry. Thank you to the delegations for participating today. It really does drive and bring it home that something that, as the Mayor has said, is not directly in our province has a big impact on all of us as Canadians. And we do have that responsibility and obligation, right, to speak up and say, it isn't okay. It's not the right thing to do. And we've worked very hard as a city, as Canadians, to be inclusive and to welcome diversity. And this goes all of that. I very much am in support of this motion. And even though it may be the small voice, often it is that smaller voice that will make a big change in something that needs to be corrected. Thank you.
Chair Henry, I also am very much in support of this, and I mean, echo Councillor Hanmutz, we may be just one voice, but all of our voices together can be a very important chorus. If I could, I would like to propose one small amendment to the motion here, and that's to indicate that, you know, this goes beyond people of the Muslim faith. It affects many different religions. So in the second point where it says, whereas Islamophobia is prevalent, I would just suggest we change that to religious intolerance. Or add it, if anyone would like to speak to that. I just think that would show that this is affecting many people and not just one segment of our community, but many segments of the community.
Does the clerk have and religious intolerance on that one? I would also suggest Councillor Veith had identified that in the first whereas it says reported hate crimes by Muslims, it probably means against Muslims.
They've been reported by Muslims.
Reported by, yeah. Okay. And hate crimes reported by Muslims. Okay. So that was dangling in an unhelpful way. So if those minor adjustments were acceptable to the mover, we'll just incorporate that up. Further discussion, I have Councillor Bodley.
Through you, Chair Henry. Yes, I would also like to express my support for the motion. And I just wanted to add a few personal comments, I guess. So it was about a month ago, I forced my children to listen to the news in the car, which they despised greatly. But we were listening to the news in the car. It was just me and my 10-year-old son, and there was a news report about Muslim women not being able to teach or having lost their jobs in Quebec. And he typically is not listening to the news. I don't think he's too busy on his Switch or reading a book. But he asked me a question about it, and he said, "What's that about?" Which I thought was curious, because as I say, he's not typically listening. And I don't try to tell him what to believe, so I kind of tried to paint what the purpose of the law was in a very general way, talking about secularism in Quebec, and explaining what that meant and what the law meant very briefly. And he sort of paused for a few seconds, and he just looked at me and he said, well, that's stupid. Why can't they just let people be who they are? And I was very proud of him, and I spoke with my wife about it later, and it's really important that 10-year-olds can get this, frankly. And I think in particular with the issue that we dealt with recently in my ward around the Muslim Prayer Center, which I've talked about at this council numerous times, this is, to Mayor Jaworski's point, a local issue. It is happening in the city of Waterloo. There have been very difficult conversations that I've had, frankly racist conversations that I've had with people. And so it's important that we express our support for the Muslim community and indeed all religious minorities in the city of Waterloo on this topic. And it's very fair to see how local residents in our community would worry about this happening here. And I attended the community consultation on Islamophobia in November of last year. And between the Coalition of Muslim Women and the Waterloo Region Crime Prevention Council, and some of the discussion that came out of there, it was very eye-opening to also hear from other members of the community, whether they be at the university at Wilfrid Laurier University, or to just hear from other high school students about how this is impacting their sense of belonging within the community, and is actually very, as I say, eye-opening and touching. Well, two of the things that came out of that report, one of them talks about solutions that have been identified with respect to Islamophobia within the region. one of those solutions was solidarity actions, which is what I see this being. And there was a discussion around who should be involved. And the number one was identified as leader. I would like to personally denounce this as well, in addition to what we've put forward here, what Councillor Vasic has put forward here. And just, again, reaffirm my personal commitment to the strategic plan initiatives around equity, inclusion, and a sense of belonging within our community. Thank you.
Through you, Chair Henry. I will support this motion for sure. You know, children are they're not born with hatred or biased against others. These are all learned behaviors. And to see politicians playing in a realm where they're building legislation that supports, reinforces, and builds that kind of hatred towards others is just so disappointing. In a country so rich as Canada, and so it's got to stop. I don't know, it has to stop at every place and every space. And you know, I don't know whether we can affect change, but we can certainly send a strong message, because it's my sincerest hope and prayer that this kind of behavior will never become commonplace in this country.
Through you, Chair Henry. Thank you, ladies, for this, and Councillor Vasic for bringing it forward. I was reading in Maclean's recently a story about a young Canadian Muslim woman born and raised in Montreal who, she's now a teacher. She's 28, and she and her family are moving to British Columbia so she can teach. It just broke my heart to read that story. So I like how this is written, and it gives us action as a council and through our strategic plan to be fair and to be inclusive. So anyway, thank you.
Councillor Vasic, were you looking to wrap up, or was there something else you were looking to do? Okay, go ahead.
Okay, through you, Chair Henry. I just wanted to, I think we need to talk about the request that was put before us by the delegation, which is to include, resolve the City of Waterloo. We should be that we accept and announce one. We need to tell the province of Ontario to denounce 20 instance. So that was a request put before us by the delegation, so I think we need to honor that in a discussion. Yeah, so it would say, therefore be it resolved, the City of Waterloo denounces Bill 21's intent and substance and reaffirms its commitment to its strategic plans. But the remainder remains the same, I think.
Some wording from the City of Kitchener's motion where one trades those things out and then just continues the line is what I'm hearing. I think the clerk will want some clarity on that, just if we haven't got that down. Can I just do that before we entertain discussion of what we're talking about? We should know what we're talking about. So, Olga, can you sort of read back what you think you've heard, just so we've all heard the same thing? Because there was a few different iterations in the back and forth there.
Sure. So I think I heard from Michael, yes, that in the therefore be it resolved, the City of Waterloo denounces Bill 21's intent and substance and reaffirms its commitment to its strategic plans, priorities, blah, blah, blah. Yeah? So denounces Bill 21's intent and substance and reaffirms its commitment.
Yeah, and then yada, yada, yada. Yeah. So now we've all heard the same thing. So I saw hands go up. Are those hands still up? Councillor Veith.
Is that in the first whereas?
First therefore.
The first therefore. I don't know. I think what we have here is really action oriented towards our community. I just find to tell someone else or another organization that they should denounce something. I don't know that is something that will have an impact, or that they will listen or care or take any action as well. Anyway, I don't know. I'm really quite happy with the way it's written now. So
there,
to hear some more discussion.
so there are two ways we can proceed. The first way is to have this wording moved and seconded as an amendment, and it is debated and voted upon before we go back to the main motion. The other is the potential mover of this, Councillor Vasic, may want to hear opinions around the table and determine whether or not to move it or not. The first one is procedurally consistent with our practice. The second one, if there happens to be a division on that question where it is not unanimous and Councillor Vasic would not want that, then I can be flexible. Notwithstanding what the clerk might tell me is in our procedure bylaw. Council is in charge of its own way of doing things, no matter what it's previously approved. So those are the two ways I can proceed. I'll look to Councillor Vasic to tell me which way to proceed as I look around for the other hands.
Well, I don't know if you just invoked the notwithstanding clause, Chair Henry, but I think what we're trying to do is make a strong case to the province of Ontario to stand up as a province to province and say, this is how we want to do business here. And I think we can still send it to the province of Ontario and tell them that we denounce this bill's intent and substance without telling the province of Quebec what they should and shouldn't do, whether we want to or not. So I think we're still going through the appropriate channels, level of government-wise and those kind of relationship-wise, by putting it in the first there solved. I'd like to put it in, and so if I don't, I think it needs to be amended and put in there, and it still can go through the appropriate channels, and so I'm going to put it in as an amendment, and if I...
So amending one's own motion is interesting, but I don't think problematic.
Sorry.
So moved by Councillor Vasic, the new wording, seconded by Councillor Bodley. So now we're debating the additional words that the delegate has requested. Broad substance of the amendment, but the additional words. So we've had some points of debate already. I'll look for others. I'll look to the seconder of that first, if you want. Councillor Bodley.
Sure, thank you through you, Chair Henry. I know Councillor Vasic and I had a discussion around jurisdictional authority here, I guess, around this. But the verbiage that I've heard, I don't think crosses the jurisdictional authority barrier for me, anyways. We're telling the community that the City of Waterloo denounces the bill, and we're making the province of Ontario aware that we are denouncing the bill. We're not telling the province of Quebec what to do. We're telling Ontario that we would not want them to enact any bill that intent or substance met this bill. So I'm in favor of the amendment as it is, but again, open to discussion.
Councillor Bonnecourt.
I'm in favor of this new wording with this addition. My hesitation earlier, I had thought when we first received a copy of this whether or not we should include a clause like this. And my reticence at the time was largely, I didn't want to be seen as virtue signalling and saying something for the sake of saying it because it wouldn't have any purpose, because City of Waterloo is not really having a discussion with the province of Quebec. This gives us the parameters to be having a discussion with our community and with our province, and these are valid discussions to be had, and I think I support including this as a worthwhile and very important public statement from our city to our residents and to the broader community.
Through Chair Henry. Because the province isn't dealing with this issue, my preference would be to send it to AMO and to let them work with the province, because they are our liaison with the province. I mean, we could ask them to bring it up in conversation with the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing vis-a-vis their Memorandum of Understanding table, which is, so the Association of Municipalities of Ontario, they meet with the province on a bi-monthly basis or every other month basis. And they talk about issues that are important to municipalities. And I feel that that's a stronger avenue to take than to try to have a conversation directly with the province. We are an animal of the province, for lack of a better way to say it, through the Municipal Act. And I would prefer this motion to be focused on supporting our community and then uplifting our voice through the Association of Municipalities of Ontario to have a conversation with the province. That's my preference. So I'm not in support of this wording. I wouldn't change the original motion. I would just provide direction to staff that what's approved be forwarded to the Association of Municipalities of Ontario with a letter that encourages them to talk to the province about this very important issue and make sure that Ontario doesn't attempt to undertake something as terrible as what's happened in Quebec.
So note the main motion, the second resolution identifies provincial advocacy bodies, urging them to do various things. And the last one does indicate that it be forwarded to AMO. So I'd say the sentiment is included in the original motion from Councillor Vasek. And at this point, we're talking about the specific words of denouncing, which is the addition that's under amendment. I have Councillor Hanmer.
Yes, thank you. Through you, Chair Henry. I do like the addition of denouncing the intent and substance of Bill 21. That is a strong message for us to be giving to our community. So I'm quite comfortable with the language being added there. I do agree with Councillor Freeman that we should be encouraging through letter that supports the motion going to AMO that it's their opportunity to step up. But in terms of our own local community, which we have the responsibility for, this is a very strong message that anything that has the spirit and intent or substance of a bill so 21 is not acceptable here. It's not right. Thank you.
Yeah, I just back to Ontario, and I think that's really the difference for me. If we're wagging our finger at Quebec, that's like
of the broader faith community is an important signal. I think we can recognize, and we've highlighted the tension that we and that define what it means to be a Quebecer has been, will continue to be an ongoing in the province of Quebec that has always engaged the rest of the country. What it means to be a Canadian, what it means to be Ontarian, what it means to be a citizen or resident in Waterloo and Waterloo region is not static. It is a constantly changing expression of identity, belonging, diversity, who we are, who we were, and who we want to be. In order for those to continue to progress towards, I think, the future that this council wishes to see as an expression of what the community wishes to see as an inclusive and equitable community where everyone feels that they can belong and thrive. It's important for us to demonstrate leadership today, and it's important for all of us to continue pro are and who we want to be. And so I think today this is a good expression of the snapshot in time in response to a concussive act that has happened outside of our borders. And we're trying to, as a community, understand what it means for us in the various levels of who we are as a family, as a community, as a province, and as a country. That's not easy. And there will always be a variety of viewpoints, but I am pleased again to see Councillor Vassic bring this forward and for our community to bring this forward. And we stand with you, we stand with all of you in denouncing this piece of legislation, but in particular in signaling and hopefully embodying that message and that expression of who we want to be as a community and as a country. So with that, we'll take the vote on the amended motion as it is being consolidated. All those in favor? The main motion as amended. We have not voted on the main motion. We have voted on the amendment to add about 6 words. Yeah. So now we are voting on the main motion since the amendment's been incorporated into it. So the big long thing as amended. All those in favor? That's carried unanimously. Thank you very much. Mayor Jaworski?
Through the chair to Fauzi, if you start getting any harassing phone calls tomorrow like you did last time where people hang up, before they hang up, tell them, listen, it's the City of Waterloo Council. You should call them. They're very proud of what they did yesterday. I had nothing to do with it. It was the City of Waterloo Council. So you tell them, call us. Thank you.
Dave's added extra lines on his phone. So with that, we're out of item 3. No presentations, no consent motion. We're on to staff reports. We have a very exciting RFQ award for SALT. We're looking ahead to SALT. Any questions on the report, Council? I'll look for a mover. Moved by Councillor Freeman, seconded by Councillor Veith. All those in favor of SALT? Carried. Well, we can have enough salt so that there are limited excuses for driving into things. Next up is the award of RFQ 1904, Pumper Rescue, 12 replacement. Things get old, we need new things. Any questions on this item? Councillor Broniger? Deputy Schubert is here for any questions.
When it comes to, I'm casting a
through the challenges with this industry and shortages in steel was part of the reason which contributed to the increased cost. Also, in addition to the availability of
and deliver services more efficiently. Pilot, we think to bring forth and service is another theme, and then the third is capacity building or cost avoidance. So those are the three themes that the work has been categorized slides. Example 1, 2, line. So this limes tier fine really ability and off fast solution for people that want to get around the city. So that's a quick example that I identify. Again, quality enhancement. Within the community services department, the example that I'll speak to is the community-based campfires in city parks. So that was an item that was brought forward and heard by staff through the neighborhood. Through a new term, around 30,000. To undertake that winter control
Good afternoon, Chair Henry, Mayor Jaworski, and members of Council. Tracy and I will be together. Which reflects the culture of continuous improvement and the things that we just do as part of our day-to-day operations, and where we would like to take it in 2020 using the Lean Six Sigma program approach. So this is just a quick extract from the report that Adam has just put forward. It shows the initiatives from each of the departments, and as I mentioned, this is really part of how we do business. And this pretty much leads us into looking at a better way and a different way of using it and tracking our efficiencies in 2020. So our journey with respect to Lean Six Sigma started in 2018 when we attended the CAMA conference, which is the Canadian Association of Municipal Administrators. It was hosted by the city of Fredericton, and this was an where the CEO of Fredericton how they have used Lean Six Sigma. We had an opportunity, when I say we, it was Mr. Anderson and I had the opportunity to visit the different locations. And for me, what really resonated was the fleet garage. So we looked at how the garage was operating, had a chance to talk to the fleet supervisors, and really understand how they were capturing all the different improvements, dealing with their challenges with respect to preventive maintenance. And it was an excellent opportunity for us to start thinking as to how we could bring some of those learnings back here at the City of Waterloo. So looking at Lean, essentially there are two parts to Lean. Lean Six Sigma. The first part is Lean, which really, as the name suggests, looking at finding efficiencies and really streamlining the process and removing any kind of waste that is there. The second part of it is Six Sigma. That is a statistical measure. It looks at reducing process variation and reducing any errors that may be happening in your transaction or in the work that is being done. So as an example, when you look at Six Sigma, the statistical measure there means it is 3.4 defects per million, which means it is 99.99966 accuracy rate. So in some industries that is very relevant. In an airline industry, you do need that level of accuracy. But in an industry, in the government sector, one would not look for a Lean Six Sigma, or not the Six Sigma part of it. So again, these are different approaches that are there, the different tools and techniques offered in each that we can pick and choose and apply in what is relevant for the process that we are reviewing. The key principles of Lean Six Sigma, it starts with focus on the customer, which is also called voice of the customer. So we look at having conversations with the customer to understand what are their pain points, what are their needs, where are the gaps, and using that as a starting point and the lens with which we start looking at the process and evaluating the process. The second part of it is really voice of the business and voice of the employee. So it starts with having a conversation with the frontline employee that is living and breathing that operating process every single day, understanding their pain points and working with them to get their input into how do we address what they may see as wasteful, duplication of process, or things that need to be streamlined. So in looking at Lean Six Sigma, the conversation starts with the consumer, with the customer, with the frontline employee. It looks at documenting what the process is in a very systematic way, using benchmarks and measures to document where your starting point is and what the end goal is. So it's a very systematic way of looking at process improvement. Our goal with Lean Six Sigma is to formalize the existing culture that we already have of improvement through introducing the Lean Six Sigma program. It will give training and additional tools to our frontline staff to be able to look at the process in a systematic way, to document the improvements, to document and benchmark what our current standards are, and to be able to measure the kind of improvements that we have made. It will also reinforce the culture that we have of continuous improvement and a pursuit of perfection. That is something that I think is a lot of cities drive towards. And most importantly is to increase our capacity to deliver services. This program is not intended to reduce the number of positions that we have in the organization, as very many questions that do come up. The intent is to increase the capacity for us to be able to deliver. There's always a need for higher level of service or additional services to be provided. We are aiming to be able to do this with fewer requests for staff. So really it's increasing the capacity to deliver on these requests that come to us. And so what we've done to date is we have met with City of Fredericton. They started their program in 2010. And as I mentioned earlier, they demonstrated the program in 2018. I've been in touch with their manager of sharing a lot of learnings from him as to how they started the program, what were their challenges, how did they roll it out. I've had a lot of conversations with them so that we can leverage from their learnings. Region of Waterloo started their program in 2017. They're still rolling it out through the organization. I've met with the Region of Waterloo staff too, and we are currently going to partner with them to leverage our training that we're starting this month itself. We will be using their training program and essentially sending some of our staff through that. And City their program in 2016. They are still rolling it out through the city too, and have had conversations with their program leader too. Then in April 2019, we attended the Canadian Lean Summit in Fredericton. And this is, again, something that is hosted by the City of Fredericton. And it brings together practitioners and trainers from all across Canada that have implemented the Lean Six Sigma program. There must have been at least 500 attendees there, and we had an opportunity to meet staff from Waterloo Regional Police Services and learn about their experience. We met staff from City of Mississauga, from Ottawa, St. John's, Province of New Brunswick, and so many more over there. And it was a really eye-opening experience to hear and talk to them about what they've done, how they've done it, what they've learned from it, and what they would do differently. Met with the consultants too from the training program at the region and at the City of Kitchener, and that has been helpful in terms of us coming up with a program that we could think of for the future. And so with this, I'll turn it over to Tracy to speak to some of her learnings from the Lean Summit.
Thanks, Keshwar. So as Keshwar had mentioned, attendance at the Lean Summit I found very interesting because we do work in always looking for continuous improvement, but what we haven't done successfully in the past is really have the measurements and the benchmarks to report on those successes. Everything's been primarily anecdotal in a lot of, like, at least my areas. So this was for me to look at a new way of thinking for that whole system approach to be able to have metrics to report on our successes, which trickles down, and then the staff who's working on the project, they feel that the measurement's been there for them, so they can own it, they can live a little bit better with it. So I found that good. And just the reality to eliminate waste and non-value work. So to look at the process to see really why are we doing this? Are we doing it because we've always done it this way, or what's the non-value work that we don't need to do? Some of the types of waste, I found it interesting in Fredericton, they gave it an acronym, downtime, so they could remember the types of waste. But so when you're looking at your process, to look for over-processing, not using your talent successfully, overproduction, touching things too often. So the types of waste was a good eye-opener for me for when I'm looking through processes. We did a waste walk. So what they talked about the waste walk is visiting the area that looks for improvement and asking the questions, like the big why. Why do we do it this way? And really getting the feedback from the people who do the work. Why is it necessary? Why do we do that? Having open communication and understanding really who your client is and who the customer is, and what's the value that we're providing to that customer. Some of the metrics they talked about, because Lean started with primarily manufacturing, so it was easier for people to know what their metrics would be, but we can look at elapsed time and months. It doesn't have to be down to the minute of what you work on. So you can look at elapsed time, process to process.
Thank you, Tracy. So just some of the posters that are the Canadian Summit. It might not be very easy to read. These were just pictures that I happened to take at that summit. So town of Bathurst in New Brunswick, one of the challenges that they worked on using Lean Six Sigma was to deal with the snow operation. So they had difficulty keeping track of their snow operation progress, as well as managing the crew between different shifts during the snow operation. So using Lean Six Sigma, they increased the use of technology and real-time dashboards to get ongoing progress status updates, and also to keep track of the crew and the shift change. And they used that in achieving their success and addressing the challenge that they had with respect to snow operation. One of the other projects that was showcased was the Bylaw Enforcement, and this was with the City of Moncton in New Brunswick. And the challenge was that the bylaw complaint process follow-up involved many people, and the roles were extremely unclear. The residents were very frustrated that they were not kept informed of the status of their complaint. So using the Lean process, they defined various roles, responsibilities. Service levels were defined for complaint handling. Technology was used also for self-serve options, and they saved 987 hours in waste checking. But as a result of the Lean Six review also, they found that there was one position that they needed to meet the demand for the service, and so that was addressed through the Lean Six Sigma process. And one of the last example is with the City of Ottawa. They have CCTV inspection of their sewer pipes throughout the city, and their process before they use Lean Six Sigma involved 52 steps. So the visual that you have is their flow chart of the entire process. It took the entire room, and they had all the flow chart mapped across from end to end of that room. So it was really 52 steps, whether it was from starting the whole CCTV review to updating the asset management plan for work done to getting the invoice paid. Through all of that, it took that many steps, and it was Lean Six Sigma really offers you a variety of tools and techniques that you can implement based on what the specific projects are. So Tracy will now speak to the 2 projects that we are piloting starting this month itself in the fleet team.
So we have 3 people who are attending at the region to acquire their Lean Six Sigma Green Belt. One of the projects, will be the project I'm leading, is for the vehicle maintenance, repair, and work orders. We are legislated to undertake vehicle inspections on our heavy-duty equipment annually, and in addition to that, we do preventative maintenance inspections just to keep them running smoothly, and those happen at predetermined times, usually from odometer readings. Challenge with that, with the amount of equipment we have, and especially during winter control, is when we're doing our inspections or doing any repairs, or if those inspections indicate we need a part or something, the equipment's not available, so it's not on the road, so it's not being used. So we want to look at, is there a way that we can streamline the process or schedule better or work with our clients better to understand the customer's need is to have the equipment on the road. Our need is to meet our obligations either from legislation or just from good maintenance of vehicles, and how we can do it that best meets everyone's needs. In addition, we have to manually input data into multiple sources. We want to look at, is there data that we're putting in our systems that perhaps we don't need? Because there's challenges always with keeping up to date on data when you're dealing with a lot of vehicles. So what we're hoping, the benefits through this project and through looking at the process and the process mapping and talking to the customers and talking to the various stakeholders and having the team look at how they do their work, is improved productivity, improved communication and planning for the preventative maintenance inspections, the ability, as I mentioned earlier, to use KPIs to drive decision-making, to know, again, is it hours of service, is it odometer readings, what's going to trigger the point when we look at a vehicle, and just having those KPIs to demonstrate the value of the garage, because right now that's what we don't have, and that goes back to happiness and the staff feeling that they're respected for what they do. The second project, this project is a shared project between our manager of procurement and our fleet asset manager, and they are going to look at the vehicle acquisition and disposition process. So every year, certain vehicles meet their lifespan, and we pull a list of vehicles that have met their list, their timing for replacement, but we can't always replace them all. So we do some reviews, and we meet with the various operators to see which equipment's running better, and so we can come up with our list of what it is we're going to replace in a given year. And there's also some needs for some new equipment, so we look at that at the same time. Currently, there's a lot of meetings to get to the final list, so we want to look at trying to streamline the process so we can come up with the list earlier in the year and then have more timely purchasing so that we can get the vehicles faster and we can move out, and then we'd be disposing of the old vehicles a little faster also. So the benefits we're hoping on this project: unbiased, more cost-effective vehicle procurement, reduced amount of time and effort from the end user, the operational clients, timely ordering, consistent retirement criteria so we can look at it holistically, and consistent communications, just opening the line of communication with our end user.
So before I get into the next steps, I just also wanted to let Council know we've made most of this presentation. I've updated it for the fleet slides and the projects that we're working on, but the other slides, we've pretty much presented it to the executive of all our labor groups. So we've met with Staff Association executive, QP executives, and fire executives and had the presentation with them. I've also put some of the groups in touch with the folks at the City of Fredericton so they can have an open dialogue and answer any questions that they may have or any particular issues that they may have or concern with respect to Lean Six Sigma as a project. So we have started the dialogue with all our labor groups too. So the pilot project we're implementing right now is in Fleet Services, actually it should be Fleet and Procurement Services Division, leveraging the training at the region of Waterloo. And the candidates will be working towards a Green Belt certification. The other project that is ongoing is review of the official plan and the zoning amendments process. It is a region-wide project, and it is going to be led by the region of Waterloo, working collaboratively with the planning staff from all area municipalities in the region. And the winter control modernization review project that we mentioned earlier, it has been approved by the project, by the province as a project to be funded from the Accountability and Audit Fund. And it is being led by a consultant using the Lean Six Sigma approach too. And so based on these pilot projects and 3 staff getting Green Belt certification in 2019, as a city, we're pretty much well positioned to develop a citywide Lean Six Sigma program for all our staff for 2020. It is an investment in our staff. It is going to be formalizing a culture of continuous improvement with standard tools and techniques. It's going to embed a whole systems approach of thinking. So we're not just looking at one process, but really looking at it from end and understanding things from a point of view. And culture into a DNA. One of the observations that both and I had came the Lean conversation from the implemented Lean Six Sigma. It is all they were talking a different language in terms of how they viewed systems and how they viewed processes. It was all with that lens of Lean Six Sigma. So we are hoping that that is something that we can work towards. It's not something that happens right away. We are just starting the journey, but that's where we're looking to build that lean culture into our DNA. And based on discussions with staff from the other cities that have implemented Lean Six Sigma, we will be putting a request for at least 1 new staff position in 2020 to lead this program for council consideration. And with this, Tracy and I are here to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you very much. A very detailed presentation indeed, and I think very exciting to both see more than 50 continuous improvement and savings initiatives that staff are already undertaking, and then at the higher level thinking, how can we formalize and train folks to not just think about these things and do them, but think about them really well and think about them together in a way that can help drive culture change at the city forward. Councillor Broniger?
Through you, Chair Henry. I have some questions specifically about Lean Six Sigma and more broadly about the efficiencies report. So preferences as to where I start?
Wherever you need to.
Okay. I'll start with Lean Six Sigma, given that you're right there. I'm just curious how this approach applies to areas that are harder to quantify. Fleet has lots of data, so that's great. It's a really good place to start, but other parts of the city and other teams and departments, they often deal with less quantifiable things. So can you explain to me how this approach might lend itself to something like our neighbourhood strategy or our arts and culture team?
Henry to Councillor. From that project and apply to everything. Fleet, yes, is quantifiable. When I look at on the finance side also, you can take a look at how long does it take to cut a check from the time that you get an invoice. So the metrics could be how long does it take to process something? Is it a certain number of weeks, a certain number of months? I think when you look at, as an example, even development plan applications or official plans, some of those things you measure in terms of how long it takes to handle the process from end to end. And if the goal is to reduce the time that it takes, then absolutely, then that would be the metric. But when you look at neighborhood strategy or consultation that you need to do, I think the goal there is a more thorough consultation, not necessarily to be very efficient, in which case you might just hold one session and you'd be very efficient, but you would not be very effective at it.
Excellent. Okay. So you're probably the best person to answer my next question as well, Ms. Patel. With the, you said, as you pointed out, there are 50 items on the list, but I'm just wondering, like multi-year budgeting is on the list, but isn't that now kind of business as usual here? Same goes with kind of trenchless technology. I'm just wondering how it comes to be that things are on the list or not on the list, because I was a little confused when some of them just looked like what is now business as usual at the city.
Through you, Chair Henry, to Councillor Goniger, I think each department submitted the efficiencies for 2019. And if some of the projects had already started but were not quite complete, I think some of the departments have put ongoing things that they will be working on next year in that list too. I think the approach that we took in corporate services, I can speak more comfortably about that, was work that we had already completed. So it was really, yes, the budget process, and it was done quite a while ago. It predates me, the 3-year budget process when it was introduced. But it has been such a huge success in saving us about 10,000 hours that we are so proud to showcase it every time. So I think this is something that right now we just speak very broadly to the initiatives and what has been continuous improvement. We might still have that kind of a lens because not everything must go through a Lean Six Sigma. And even through a Lean Six Sigma, there could be very simple projects that are done with people that have a white belt or yellow belt, because even that training for Lean Six Sigma is graduated almost like martial arts. It starts with a white belt, a yellow belt, a green belt, a black belt, and a master black belt. So there's some projects that are just done at a white belt level where you don't really need any major consultation, you just do it. The more complex ones are done that are taken on by a green belt, which involves facilitation. So we might still have some that lend themselves towards a Lean Six Sigma review and a standardization and a whole methodology. Some may be things that are just done on the fly because you just know what it is.
And I have a couple of questions drilling down into some of the efficiencies listed. So I'm not quite sure who is going to answer this, but I noticed that one of the items from corporate services was that service teams would be taking over the social media responses to enable some kind of faster responses when issues are raised, which is great. I just wanted to make sure, will staff who are dealing with those responses, will they be given some training on how to deal with a situation if it escalates, or whether they require more information, or whether they find themselves in the middle of an tirade that's
a number of divisions that are in particular receiving questions through public or social media, or today communications would be receiving information or requests for information and then liaising with certain groups. So it is a pilot program, and there is dialogue with the communications group as to how best to roll that out, and certainly working with the individuals that will be responding on social media. So my understanding is that yes, there is some training and continued dialogue kind of over time to make sure that they're comfortable with the new role. And it is a pilot.
That's great. I mean, I know residents will appreciate having even more responsiveness. I just want to make sure that staff are fully supported and equipped to deal with the rugged nature of online discussion sometimes. And my final question was just regarding, again, how things were listed. I noticed that the Lyme pilot was listed as one of the successes, but as far as I understand, we don't have the data yet from that pilot. How have we decided that it's a success when we don't have the data yet?
Through your chair, Henry, my response would be that the success really is in Waterloo being the first in Canada to bring this technology into a city. And being nimble enough to work with within a framework that did have some ambiguity. It certainly, while we don't have all of the data, we certainly understand that it did provide additional accessibility to areas in a different way that didn't exist before. And so that's how I would position that success. Certainly the data will allow us to talk more in depth around how users, where they went, how often they used the Lime scooter pilots. But we were first in Canada, so I think that's a success for sure.
Okay. I'll leave my questions at that, but I think maybe I'm gonna hold my verdict on successes, because I'm really looking forward to the data, and I fully expect it to be a success, but I really want our reports to be very worthwhile for the public. I don't want to be putting out reports that look like we're just patting ourselves on the back. I want us to really be putting valid and valuable information out there. So that's really where my questions are coming from, but thank you.
I think there could be an opportunity on that, Mr. Lauder, to elucidate what you've sort of spoken to. From a process point of view, it was not easy, but it was also fast, and the nimbleness is not common in the municipal sector. So depending on how we're quantifying success, that's certainly a quantity for success on that one. Councillor Bodley.
Thank you, through your chair, Henry. I have a question regarding how are commissioners or directors being encouraged to look at Lean Six Sigma, potential Lean Six Sigma projects? Is this being sort of directed as a top-down initiative, or are we asking the people who are on the ground to tell us what is the most useful projects, I guess, to consider?
Through you, Chair Henry, to Councillor Bodley. 2019 is a pilot project, and since I had the opportunity to be at the CAMA conference and we have done a fleet review last year, we took it upon ourselves to initiate the pilot and just do it within corporate services. But at the same time, we are rolling out the message. So I have presented it to ECMT, the Extended Corporate Management Team, and also on October 31st, when we have our general staff meeting, we'll be making a similar presentation there. So we're rolling out the message to the entire organization. When it comes to 2020, this is where we're looking for a coordinator or leader to run with this program. In my conversations with both the City of Mississauga as well as with the region of Waterloo, they've all taken very different approaches in how they have rolled out the citywide program. With the City of Kitchener as an example, and with the region of Waterloo, they invite applications for a project to be funded, or not funded, but to be put through this Lean Six Sigma project. And even in the City of Mississauga, for that matter, they receive a whole lot of applications, and they have set up a separate steering committee that evaluates those different kind of applications. So we still have to design all of that whole program and determine how are we going to roll out the training? How are we going to evaluate the projects? Is it based on the maximum payback? All of that has to be sorted out. So I've managed to squeeze in a little bit of the work for Lean Six Sigma in this current year, but this does need a dedicated person to develop a citywide program. And so again, from the conversations that we've seen in City of Mississauga, the rollout was a full blast in terms of training a whole lot of people in one shot, 20, 30 people, or the goal was to have white belt training across the entire city for everybody to be trained. When we spoke to another city in I think New Brunswick, their approach was to take a much softer approach and to invite people that wanted to come in and have a lunch and learn session and learn about Lean Six Sigma. So that is how they rolled out the basic education about Lean Six Sigma. So we have to figure out what suits our culture, what suits our staff needs, and figure out what the program should be for 2020. So I have a lot of ideas floating in my head, but I think we need somebody that's dedicated to it to give it that initial push to launch that program in the city.
Excellent, thank you. And this is more of a question on the 50 things, I guess. So under the efficiencies and improvements, there's sort of a categorization, and things fall into one of three categories, or they may cross over into multiple categories. And the three categories were cost savings, quality enhancement, or level of service enhancement, and then building capacity. If I could make a suggestion, because I think one of the really interesting efficiencies that I noted was the solar idle project and electric fleet, which is touching on some of the cost savings and things like that. But I would suggest that we should also have a fourth thing that some of these things fall into, which talks about our commitments to sustainability and whether there's any efficiency with respect to the fact that it's reducing greenhouse gas emissions or affecting the amount of carbon we're releasing into the air, or reducing the amount of energy, et cetera, et cetera. Because right now in the solar idle project, that was almost like an afterthought in the commentary was, and it also did this. Whereas I would like to see that sort of moved ahead and to be a consideration when we look at these. So that was just a comment. And then my last question is around the Honk Mobile program. And I note that there was a comment in there that said that revenue increased due to popularity. Are we making a statement that people like paying for parking? And yeah, it would appear so if it's so popular. Yeah, when you get to pay online, you like anything. So I'd just like to get some feedback from that about the popularity and how it could be rolled out further or expanded, etc.
So through Chair Henry to Councillor Bodley, on behalf of Christine Tetman, who's not with us this afternoon, we initially proposed the Honk Mobile pilot to be break even operationally. That was our end goal. We were hoping revenue would at least cover the cost of the platform, which was approximately $10,000 per year under the software as a service is the option we went with. I'm not going to say that the Uptown patrons are using this as a way of saying they're interested in paying for parking. I think what they're showing is they were interested in paying for longer stay options after the 2 hours that they're provided for no charge or free. So you still have the ability to come and use the 2 hours free, and then you may move on. Those that are interested in staying longer and they're willing to pay for that, I think that's what it's really showing us. So we're trending to generate a net profit of about $30,000 under the Honk Mobile program, which we will be building into the 3-year budget, which helps keep overall cost of parking permits and hourly down, as it was a revenue source that we didn't have earlier. But I wouldn't use it as a general statement that Uptown is ready to pay for parking across the board. That would be a larger conversation.
I wouldn't necessarily use it as as the comment that you said, but I think that there's at least something there that suggests that if we make it easy enough that people are willing to pay for it, because I don't know what those patrons were doing beforehand, but obviously there is an appetite, there is at least some appetite there for consideration.
I think many were hoping not to get a ticket and or moving their cars every 2 hours. Some still are, I think, just anecdotally, and just for clarity on the revenue piece, that's inside the parking enterprise. It's not a general revenue line for the city. It's inside an enterprise that requires a tax-based subsidy to date. So anything that requires less of a tax-based subsidy tomorrow is better for everyone. Councillor Hammer.
Thank you. Through you, Chair Henry. Regarding Lean Six Sigma, I have a comment, a suggestion, and a challenge. Ooh. Yeah. Which one's first? I'll go with my comment. In another life, or in my previous life, looking at ways of improving things has just been the way to do things. Everything from total quality improvement to CQI initiatives going on. One of the things I really like about the Lean Six Sigma approach is it's a methodology and it's a way of thinking. And it almost is givable print. So my continue that. Particular outcome where you can come up to 5 things, just different. So, Ms. Patel, your response to Councillor Bonnegaard about how are you measuring, I would challenge you that it probably can be looked at in everything that we need to do. My suggestion is that it's really easy to get embedded in our own subject matter. So constantly looking at what are other cities doing, what are other regions doing. I'd suggest that we get out of our comfort zone and look at what other sectors have been doing, because this approach has gone absolutely from manufacturing, but it's in many other areas, and everybody's tried to put it in place. You may get different ways of thinking of things. So just we've got lots of organizations in this region using a Sigma approach, especially city gets going with we are in our
I've got Mayor Jaworski.
Thank you. Through the chair, I think when I look at the e-scooter pilot, And I was thinking about this earlier. We're talking about Six Sigma really applies to planes in the sky, 99.99999. And I think what I think frustrates some of our citizens sometimes is that when they come in for what they think is a simple ask, because we have 20-some departments or 20-some divisions, it actually impacts many different divisions. And I think if you were to have a committee of all the people that would or should have been involved in the e-scooter pilot and just had them say yes or no to it, you probably would have had more no's than yeses. Yet we still got, I think that so my is maybe it's of even though there's fundraisers, and we've come up with a plan where we're actually going to have 5 different run areas that are pre-approved, so we can show them to prospective volunteers that want to run things, that we have these kinds of ideas that have been actually pre-approved internally, that then make it easier for the customer. And I'm not sure if I can think of any particular examples, but I do, whenever in dealing hall, we have 5 or 6 divisions that are involved in the decision making because it impacts so many of our divisions.
Through you, Chair Henry, to Mayor Jaworski. Absolutely, those are things that we will have to make a list of in 2020 as to which ones are the priority to address. There could be some things that you have as an express project that you may want to do very quickly, which you identify as being high priority, or where the residents need the quickest answer, whether it's for economic development or for whatever purpose. So I think those are some of the projects that may come from CMT in terms of saying those are what we hear from council as being the high priority needs. At the same time, I do expect that we will have projects coming from the front line too, in terms of bottoms-up approach of saying, these are our pain points, this is what we want to address. So we will be getting a whole mix of it in terms of looking at what projects need to be dealt with. But it really comes back to my earlier point. We need somebody to lead Six Sigma. So the responsibility that I have for corporate services and wouldn't be something that I would be able to get to visit St. Mary's Hospital. That's what got them thinking about Lean Six Sigma. So again, those are things and ideas that I'm hearing from other organizations in terms of where they have started. And so I'm certainly open to looking at it to see what we can learn from the hospital sector. I do know Lean Six Sigma is very prevalent in the health sector.
I remember sitting in a presentation a number of years ago. I think the same were talking about going to TODA and
potentially. So it's a commitment from your project, working with the staff to really support jobs. So that is a commitment. Just the actual program speaks to that at all, and what they say about that. That's a question I didn't ask, but I'm just thinking of after this conversation. So do they have a methodology or practices around or talk about or think about potential or about job losses?
Through you, Chair Henry, to Councillor Bassick. So those are the conversations that I've had with each of the cities, with City of Mississauga as well as with the region, with Fredericton also very extensively. And very interestingly, the person who's the manager of continuous improvement in the City of Fredericton was the QP president before Lean Six Sigma was implemented. On Lean Six Sigma training and education and certification, and look at that as an avenue for your own career path too. So when you look at Lean Six Sigma, it speaks to the tools and techniques to look at your measure your. It does how you deal with this. And myself schedule my training for next year. So as far as I know, it does not speak to how. This is more a people issue, and we're just talking to a lot of other organizations to learn from them as to how they've dealt with it, how did they approach it. And from my perspective, those are the open conversations we've had with the executive to tell us what is your concern, you need to know, which is why I've put them in touch with Fredericton to say, talk directly to you. Understand how they implemented it. Did they have any issues? So we're trying to keep the conversation as open as possible. And at the same time, I think that's the commitment that as CMT we're making to say that we're not looking at reducing the number of positions in the city at all. Roles may change because once again, when you're redefining a process, and to reiterate, the process will be redefined by frontline staff. Pain points, they look at how the process needs to be different. So roles may change, but we're not looking at reducing the number of staff because I think there are a lot of unmet needs still too. Whether you need more parks or you need more of other things, there are expectations that are at a higher level that we are not able to meet. So this is where we're really looking to increase our capacity.
There's a demand for better service, not less service, certainly in the city, and lots. Anything else, Council, on this? The of the 20 to 2022 budget strategy, Philippa, whenever you're ready.
Good afternoon. I am just gonna. Good afternoon. We have a brief presentation summarizing key messages from the report in your packet today about the upcoming 3-year budget. So I'm the spokesperson. Brad and myself will field any questions that you have. But as you know, the budget process involves many people across the entire organization, so it really is a giant team effort. Last year's one-year budget had a theme of a balanced approach, if you will, and that was in light of council being newly elected and with an existing strategic plan to really guide the decision. And to the strategies progress within strategic an appropriate theme for our budget. Service and program delivery, keep pace with inflation. Making sure that as we build things, this is number 2, making sure that as we build things that we have prioritized funds to properly operate those things. Number 3 is investing more in maintenance and asset renewal. And of course, there will Council, there are measures that happen to prices and living at some point in the past, and these can be helpful to make financial decision making for ourselves in the future. They're limited, but they're another tool for helping that decision making to happen. So the first 3 measures on this slide are the most current results based on a 12-month average. This all the time. Of 12 months. On average. The non-residential construction price index is another measure that we look at, and this particular piece is the latest measure. It's taken on a quarterly basis, so this is for the first quarter, which is the most recent results published by Statistics Canada, the first quarter of 2019 compared to the first quarter of 2018. So the increase is a 5.3% increase for the Toronto area. There's 11 areas in Canada that are calculated, and so 2 of them are in Ontario. One is Ottawa, and the other one is Toronto, and we tend to rely on the Toronto data to just help frame what that impact may be in our particular area. So back to our budget strategy and our 4 main areas of focus. How are we going to make progress in the 3-year budget while still considering impacts to affordability? And so we're doing that, the conversation we just had in the previous report in a variety of ways, but certainly looking at efficiencies, cost savings, other revenue opportunities that aren't tax focused, budget true-ups. What can we do by looking at our results and seeing what is sustainable from a budgeting perspective going forward without necessarily impacting citizens? And then, of course, applying our policy around assessment growth and doing all of those things to keep the impact to our taxes as low as possible and in line with inflation in order to do those first things. As far as preventive maintenance, asset renewal, and then new strategic priorities, we're looking and exploring opportunities as our role in as a major shareholder of Waterloo North Hydro to determine whether there is a sustainable opportunity there from a budget perspective, as well as looking at some measured potential funding above inflation. As with our last budget, our plan from a staff perspective is to have a prioritized menu list for council to consider and help should you wish to activate or deactivate anything that is presented as part of the 3-year budget. So key dates. We are at the very top of this table, September 16th. I just wanted to run quickly through what you can expect over the next few months. So in October, we will present an update with regard to our background study from a development charge perspective. And then in November, we will be looking at our asset management plan in terms of an update as to what that looks like, as well as public engagement results. And I'm also told that we will likely bring forward another report card. If you recall, those report cards are coming through every couple of months. So there's another report card also anticipated in November. So then in December, it gets really fun. This is where we publicly release the budget and all the documents as well as our business plans. The documents include lots of other ancillary reports, but that hopefully really understand for the city utilities report. That will come back in January, so you'll see it when I put it up on the slide. And then building standards will also be coming forward with the intention to have approval that day. And the DC background study will also be presented for your consideration then again a little bit later on. So a lot of information in December. However, then, and I will talk about public engagement in a moment, then as similar to the last couple of years, we would be looking at business plan presentations occurring throughout the month of January to unpack some of those budget questions that council may have as they're reviewing documents. Then we would be back for a formal development charge public meeting in January. and looking for support of rate changes for utilities later in January as well. In February, capital budget review, this is where we talked about the different categories, routine, non-routine, and where council also delves in a little bit further into those capital projects and asks questions ahead of the February 10th ultimate budget approval date. So there is a lot. We heard from you back in March when we did our 2019 process debrief that you felt the timing was reasonable and the pace, and so we've really modeled this next cycle on that feedback. As far as public engagement, we are looking to launch it formally with the release on December the 9th and continue it towards the end of January so that we can then pull together the results and provide council with information ahead of the February 10th approval date so that you can really be thinking about that feedback that's coming in a more formal way, in addition to probably what you're already having with your own constituents in a more informal way. So on the public engagement front, as far as our strategy goes, as you know, the city has a long-standing practice to undertake meaningful engagement with the community on a variety of topics. One of the tools being Engage Waterloo, although that certainly isn't the only. Just going on there the other day, it is quite amazing to see how many things are out there for different input from folks throughout the community. We undertake engagement on the city's budget and priorities on an ongoing basis, not just at budget time. So to that end, engagement was conducted recently on several topics that directly influence the budget decision making. So we would like to take the findings from these conducted engagements, and we plan to then use these to correlate very distinctly to what's being proposed in the budget. So we would like to tell them where we heard this feedback, what the feedback was, and then what the operating and or capital budgets are proposing specific to that feedback. And we hope that that will help more easily correlate for folks how budget decisions come to be. That was some of the feedback that we received in our last communication survey around the budget process in the 2019, was that people weren't always aware of how those decisions were made, where they came from. And so we hope that there's a connection, a stronger connection there that we can make. If you also recall, during the debrief process that we had with council in March after the one-year budget, there was also a lot of discussion about this topic as it relates to budget and the challenges around getting meaningful engagement around budget because it is so large. And so we talked about promotion and how we might be able to improve that. And I think one of the interesting points was to use a different topic at the right time of year to promote the budget engagement. And so if in December there is an interest in perhaps snow clearing or whatever might be of interest at that time, if we can use that as a gateway to have, to point over here, have your say and do this too, because it's likely that folks are very interested in a very specific topic, and hopefully that will migrate them over to doing this as well. There was also conversation about perhaps how we can better support council, how we can work together to help you individually in what you're doing with your own ward constituents. And everyone has a different style and approach, so it's not necessarily a one-size-fits-all cookie cutter. But we would certainly like to offer that communications and finance can work with individual council members to provide you with what works for you, be it information for your Twitter feed, if that's what works for you, or if you want to have more offline type of engagements, whether we can provide you with information to use in that kind of a setting. That's certainly something that we would be happy to do as part of our engagement strategy. And finally, I'm nearing the end here, to refocus some attention as well on infrastructure. Obviously, that was one of the 4 areas that we described up front in terms of our budget strategy, and we know we are talking about it an awful lot, but it's because it is important. So just to take an opportunity to come back to this topic and talk about the fact that asset renewal is not a new thing for the City of Waterloo. This council, as well as previous councils, have made thoughtful decisions on how to balance new and changing interests with also maintaining all those things we already have. And these are usually very difficult decisions. CURF was first established in 2008, and that is our Capital Infrastructure Reinvestment Reserve Fund. It's very long. And back then, and some of you members of council were part of that decision to develop that reserve back then. And that was a really great step in helping the organization understand what our investment into rehabilitation was. And at that time, it was seeded really through a 3-year phase-in of annual operating contributions. So it took us a little while to build up, but we did that. And we put some one-time grants in there, and we developed our assessment growth policy around that. And that was really the first step in making a concerted step towards a solution. And it was focused on roads and facilities at that time. In 2012, there was a change in the surplus allocation to allocate 0.25% to this reserve. So it's been happening over time, the very dedicated investment into rehabilitation. And then in 2018, more recently in 17, with reserve consolidations, a change to our assessment growth policy, and a few other things, again, that investment is growing, and council has been signaling that this is an important thing. So just to note that as the city continues to move forward with its infrastructure renewal strategy, staff is exploring other opportunities to increase investment as part of the 3-year budget. And this is a real focus for us. We're looking at a combination of the funding that we're receiving from Waterloo North Hydro to perhaps balance out what might be needed from a tax perspective. And we just wanted to let council know that that is something that we're doing in earnest, and hopefully that will help balance the end solution that council may be considering ultimately during budget deliberations. So that is our presentation, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Philippe. Appreciate the detailed information and really the first look at the timing that's going to be important, and how staff and council are going to build its decision making through the budget process. So December 9th and February 10th will be very, very big days. Councillor Freeman.
Thank you, through you, Chair Henry. So I see on the briefing note that we received, it spoke about the asset management plan coming to council November the 18th. And so I had a question with regard to more broadly how you anticipate bringing those results into the budget strategy as we're moving forward, because that's a separate engagement piece. So I'm trying to get a sense, because when you spoke about current delivery, operating impacts, infrastructure renewal, and new and changing, the asset management plan kind of falls under a couple of things, right? Which is operating impacts of capital and where do you see, because you spoke about the dividend, which I know is what I've been talking about in the past, and I also noticed that you spoke about how we're changing the amount of resources that we're putting into reinvestment and CURF. And so I'm just trying to get a sense from you of kind of, where you see that headed.
Through you, Chair Henry, to Councillor Freeman, thank you for your question. So I think that what we're looking to do is marry, so let me back up. We did some public engagement related to asset management plan and the gap and, willingness and people's understanding in 2017 and 18, which is helping to inform our current, draft proposed budget already. But then in November, when we receive the outcomes of the latest public engagement for asset management, that's another kind of layer of information that we'll be looking at to incorporate in some way. Ultimately, council, we're going to be in November and December talking about what it means kind of operationally to do or not do in greater investment that, we're already doing, whether we're expanding that investment or whether we're keeping that investment or what the right level is. And that is something that council's going to need to decide how that will work and whether the level of service, through these public engagement conversations are going to be at the right place, depending on what that investment looks like. And so it's not one report or one thing that's going to determine all that. I would suggest that in November and in December and throughout January and February, through our broader consultation on budget, the asset management consultation, the menu items and how that's going to be presented, lots of points of view on how perhaps, the solution can be arrived at if council feels there's a solution that needs to be arrived at, and to what extent, how long that will take, and all of those things. So we're really looking at different levers for council's decision making and not making it prescriptive, but providing hopefully a number of inputs to help with your ultimate decision.
And to be clear, just to clarify on the asset management engagement that's new, that's happening this year, Cassandra had been to this council early this year. Gosh, it's been a long year already, to give us an overview on what those were. And the intent was not to do a standalone asset management conversation four people would show up to because they were trying to get another and we were in front of them, but that those would be embedded in other major public engagement activities on significant projects like Silver Lake and like that. And they would focus on the kinds of assets that were most related to the reason people actually showed up. So we were piggybacking on those. So that's the consolidation of information that we're seeing in November, correct?
Correct.
So my other question is with regard to the development charges piece. So recognizing the changes that are being made provincially, again, can you kind of do a little bit of looking into the crystal ball and give me a sense of where you see that work going?
Through you, Councillor Henry, Councillor Freeman, very good question. I will say that just when we think we know everything about where it's headed, it kind of changes. So we are keeping our ear to the ground. But currently, the plan is that regardless of what's happening or what's happened with Bill 108, our intention was to align the development charge background study with our 3-year budget from this point on. So that was already the intention a couple of years ago, that we would do this going forward every 4 years, so that council was in a better decision to prioritize growth projects with rehabilitation or new type of things that aren't necessarily growth related, but changing in demographics or interests, whatever. And that wasn't happening with the off years being from our multi-year budget process. It was, DC says this, we're going to fund that, and then everything else is left for everyone else. And we didn't feel that was the best way moving forward, so we wanted to do this regardless. Certainly, there is a bit of a hiccup with Bill 108 as to our process, and it could very well mean that, and most likely will mean that next year we will be back and we will be doing a community benefit charge bylaw. We'll essentially revise what those soft service related projects that you might be approving in February look like beyond 2020. So the DC background study, the 10 years, you essentially approve. But in order to keep forward and to align the processes in the way that we think is probably best for your decision making, we recommend continuing forward with our plan.
This is my last question. Thank you, through you, Chair Henry. I think there's value to, if I could suggest, when we look at our business plans and the themes around progress, to also kind of pinpoint or highlight the ways in which we're thinking differently. So not necessarily that it's an efficiency, but it in all likelihood could save a lot of money, and it's as a result of thinking differently. I think that Councillor Bodley pointed to one, which I had noticed too, around the solar cells to offset idle emissions. And my gut instinct is I don't know where's the right report to put that in. My expectation is going to be in an adaptation or mitigation place, that's a better summary place than just in the efficiencies hold to identify that kind of thing. But that with the library, we're looking at putting a solar wall as a part of the build. And that's a great example of how it is we're going to think differently, and it's going to offset our operation and maintenance costs down the road. And so I think every opportunity we have to kind of identify those pieces, even within winter control, like we started using the beet juice some years back to help offset salt implementation because it helps to prevent the buildup of ice. I think those pieces need to be better identified more broadly. And my understanding is too that the beet juice also reduces wear and tear on the roads from, not oversalting. So it's just some of those pieces that I think as we continue with our mitigation and adaptation plans, at some point there has to be this overlap between what's happening there and how it actually is. Many of those decisions are budget conscientious, and so I'm just looking for that. I know staff is working on this, and I just want to reiterate how valuable I think it is, and that's that alignment between the business plans and how each department business plan feeds into the budget and where you're allocating resources. And so I really appreciate that work and how that's going to play out, and look forward to seeing that.
I think the overall reporting structure and templates people are still working through exactly how doing things differently on that is going to work, but that there will be, after budget approval, a lot of alignment in terms of reporting back that may actually be the best place to start consolidating that, given where we're at right now, from what I understand in talking to staff working on translating our strategic plan into budget. So there's that S and the F part of this gig here, trying to work together. So I was trying to remember what other hands I saw, since I wrote no initials down. So I'll look at Councillor Bonagor. And sorry if I missed a hand earlier. Go ahead.
Through you, Chair Henry, I just have a quick question, and it may just be you reminding me of what was included in the big stack of books. But when we do get our big stack of books, will there be a breakdown of the budget by kind of each of the guiding principles in our strat plan? Will we be able to, because we get a lot of questions from people saying, how much is the city spending on sustainability? How much is it spending on active transit? Is that kind of breakdown going to be included? I'm just double checking.
Through Chair Henry to Councillor Bonagor, we will be reporting at the strategic objectives level. So on the flip side of the pamphlet, and what we need to do there is align how we're reporting the operating budget with how we're reporting the capital budget. So we will be reporting on those 6 areas. And there's an additional one where it's a little bit more general, and we're going to refer to that as supporting the strategic plan guiding principles. So it may not perfectly align with one of those areas, and it's a little bit more broad. For example, something like what we referred to as a budget true-up opportunity, where that might not fit with inclusion, and might not fit with infrastructure renewal. It's just kind of broadly supporting all of them. But the dollars, every dollar within both op and cap will be within the strategic plan pillar in terms of different reporting metrics and stuff like that.
I don't think we should be surprised, and this isn't revealing anything that I actually wouldn't know anyways, but the number one pillar that we'll probably see dollars on, infrastructure, replacement and renewal, because you can do one thing in there, and that's a lot of money, and we do a lot more than one thing. Councillor Bassick.
Thanks, through you, Chair Henry. It builds off of that then. And the only thing I think that we promised as the council, I think all of us, and we talked about it in the last budget, was the active transportation that we'll spend so much per person. So I'm curious if that will be captured in some way. What would that look like? Do we need to give direction as a council, knowing your constraints with all of the new things you have to do because of Bill 108? So specifically around, can we get, again, a per person for active transportation? And then specifically, I'm also curious, maybe this is a Lean Six Sigma question, if I understand the program at all yet. So maybe you can't do it. Can we understand how much we're spending on motorist or traditional motorist activity versus active transportation? And maybe the question could be, like, what if we got rid of all the roads and we just did active transportation? How much money would that cost? I mean, that probably isn't a question for this budget cycle, but that difference between motorist budget and active transportation budget. So just curious about your perspective about what that might look like for this budget cycle, if that's at all possible.
Through you, Councillor Henry, to Councillor Bassick. Thank you for your question. So I think these kinds of questions are important for members of council to communicate to us if they are of interest to you, because we may not quite get to that level of granularity when we're reporting on, the strategic plan investments. So if that's something that, is of interest and you feel it's important to help guide your decision-making in this three-year budget, certainly knowing about that is very helpful. And so to your point, Councillor Bassick, that's something that, if that's we can work with Integrated Planning and Public Works to see how we can gather this kind of data. On the surface, it probably seems relatively simple, but nothing's ever simple. But it is a way of thinking as those kind of areas of interest. It's important for us to have a knowledge of that going forward. So appreciate that coming forward so that we have some time to work on that.
Maybe 52 process steps, 13 handoffs, and whatever other data I saw on Geshru's slide. Others, and just more to say, as an example of how some of that can be technically challenging, and Acting Commissioner Ormson can get in on this if he'd like to. But it's, we've got a road reconstruction project that we're doing in my neck of the woods. Not uncontroversial, but it's adding a sidewalk because there is none as part of the reconstruction. But the road width will be reduced by the same width of a sidewalk. So the net permeable area will be the same, but there will be active transportation on that. So how do we categorize that in terms of spending? If we didn't do the road project, we wouldn't be doing that. But it's very few dollars to do the AT part. But because we're doing a very expensive road project is the only reason we're able to make that investment, which is a substantial corridor connection. So those are the kinds of decisions that are behind answering that question that make it difficult to easily pop out. But it's good to feel that, because I know there are lots of councillors that are looking to be able to tell their cycling Waterloo region folks what the number is so that they can easily report it and feel like we're making good progress on it. Councillor Bodley?
Thank you, through Chair Henry. A couple of questions. I guess this is just an initial, just very broad, big picture question. Given all of the uncertainty around Bill 108, do we have a concern that this three-year budget process might have challenges associated with it, in the sense that we're going to have to come back and significantly alter the budget in year 2 or 3?
Through you, Chair Henry, to Councillor Bodley. We certainly will be altering year 2 and 3. To what extent, I honestly, I don't know. Unfortunately, that crystal ball isn't there for me right now, because there are a lot of questions still to be resolved with the proclamation that is yet to come and, the detailed legislation. But we know for a fact we will be amending years 2 and 3 for sure.
And just to follow up on that, we still think that a 3-year budget process, obviously it has the efficiency piece to it, and it was really interesting and eye-opening to see how many hours we're saving on that, which is excellent. But we still believe that this is the appropriate way to move forward.
Yes, yes, we do at this point because, it certainly is an important piece, but it is not the only piece in the budget process. And so, we feel that coming back and tweaking potentially, the city's co-pay as an example that may affect other projects within the capital budget as a result of going from development charges to a new CBC world is still worthwhile because, there are many other projects that are not affected by development charges, and we'd like to make sure that those things continue to move forward. So in the end, we think it's still worth the effort, and hopefully we won't lose the momentum from going into a 3-year and then having to tweak years 2 and 3. We have done that in a very limited way in the past based on, some things that have changed over the last few cycles. I think you might have seen that in the report potentially, but it's still not redoing an entire process from scratch by any means. And you get another opportunity to look at it again not too long after, so that's always fun.
Perfect. Thank you. Is it possible to go back to slide 5? I think it was. I have a. Nope, 6. Okay. Yeah. So in just looking at the sample here for public engagement, you've got sort of a simple example of what we heard, proposed actions, etc. And I'm wondering if in this theoretical section of how we're going to look at things, whether this is a place where we should be explaining how that's going to accomplish the thing in the what we heard. So either that's some KPI, if it's very easy, not that anything's easy, but if it makes sense for it to be a KPI, or for it to be some sort of level of service definition that says it will improve in this manner, beyond just looking at it and saying, this is the thing that we're going to do, and here's how much it costs, but also sort of, this is what we expect the outcome to be from that. And just some comments if you have any feedback on that?
Thank you, Councillor Bodley. Yes, we had intended on putting context behind what improving snow clearing will mean in this budget. And to your point, we still have to determine how we'll express that in the survey and in this background information that we'll be presenting as part of the survey. But absolutely, that's part of the plan to try to help people understand what it means.
Just one last one, if I can, through you, Chair Henry. So I just like an official, I guess, public comment to talking about how challenging or how limiting it is to look at the CPI or inflation target for a municipality, given particularly given the fact that the significant percentage of our operating budget is in labor, which is automatically pegged to inflation. So I'm hoping you could maybe just give a comment on that and how that impacts not just infrastructure renewal, which is a unique challenge, but also all of the other pieces of our strategic plan that we're trying to make progress on.
Through you, Chair Henry, to Councillor Bodley, thank you for your question there. It can be very challenging from the perspective, to your point, that we have current service level that our citizens are accustomed to receiving that continue. And as a service industry, we do have labor, and meeting those labor requirements in the future at around an inflationary level, while thinking about growth and dealing with an infrastructure gap, as well as changing priorities. So not just because your population is growing, which is more of the DC side of life, but providing different opportunities for different people, which is really more the strategic plan lens. Being able to do all of those things at inflation is extremely challenging, which is why, back to the Lean Six Sigma and continuous improvement, the city of Waterloo could not possibly be where they are right now without having done continuous improvement along the way in order to build capacity, in order to avoid other costs, to keep those tax increases lower at and around an inflationary level. And so it's really part of the formula. Without any tax increases beyond inflation, you absolutely, just to kind of maintain without going further and doing other things and new things and addressing your infrastructure in a more meaningful way, you would still need efficiencies and cost savings in order to stay at that level. Just it's a simple math equation in terms of materials that we're purchasing at different costs, projects that are coming in higher than necessarily budgeted because of tariffs and cost escalations from so many different perspectives, as well as the labor side. So there are many variables, but it is very challenging. It is very challenging.
Anyone else? Ms. Patel?
Through you, Chair Henry, if I could add also to Felipe's comments too, the fact that we contribute 40% of our assessment growth towards infrastructure, that is something also very unusual that we do, which again takes away from funding that other cities use to balance their operating budget. So I think that is something that we need to keep in our mind too, that makes balancing the operating budget still very challenging. It is the right and the prudent approach to take, so I don't disagree with it, because we're setting aside money for investing in our assets, but it constrains us on the operating side because 40% of it is contributed to the reserves.
Yeah, and if you take this isn't the average, but if you assume assessment growth over the last decade has been 1.2%, and it's usually higher, but if you assume that, it's 0.3% every year that we're squirreling away to make sure that we can repair stuff and repair the stuff that we're building now, rather than putting that into the operating budget to balance it. So that's 0.3% a year that we are taking off the table so that we can do the right thing in the long run, rather than doing the popular thing in the short run. And that's the base decision for the last decade that councils around this table have made. Okay, so again, that council receives this report for information. Someone want to move that we receive the report? Councillor Veith. And Councillor Bodley would like to second receiving the information. All in favour of having received the information we've just heard of? Thank you very much. That's carried. Consideration notice motion given at a previous meeting. We have none. Notice of motion, we got around having to do one. Communications and correspondence we dealt with earlier. No regional information and correspondence. No unfinished business. I have an item of new business and questions, but are there any other items of new business and questions? Yeah, we'll go do that later. I should do mine first. So one of the things that I think we've all been reading, but we've also been hearing as we've talked to students and other tenants around the community, is that there are some challenges that many folks are experiencing. Without condoning the ways in which some of us have found out about these, it's important to understand what they mean for those tenants and what they mean from the perspective of what it is the city, where the city's role is and what the city's heard and what we can do in the future. So I was wondering if Mr. Turner would be able to come up to a mic. I've got a couple of questions that I hope will give myself and council and the community some clarity on where we stand today. So first, I was wondering, Mr. Turner, if you could sort of characterize the level of complaints that the city's received over the last while from tenants in multi-residential buildings in particular.
Thank you, Chair Henry. We do receive property standards complaints in high-rise buildings on a regular basis. What I can tell you is that we don't have any record of any particular building, whether it's a student accommodation building or otherwise, as being overly problematic. Specifically with regard to what's made it into the media in the last little while, The subject buildings do not, based on our stats, they cannot be categorized as being overly problematic. We get complaints from time to time. We deal with them in a typical fashion. But there's certainly nothing out of the ordinary in terms of the types of buildings, at least that our numbers reveal, in terms of the types of buildings that are being characterized in the media in the last week or so.
So I want to get into that a little bit further, but first, if we sort of step back and think of ourselves as a tenant experiencing an issue in a building, who is a tenant's first call when they're experiencing a challenge in their unit or on their property?
Through you, Chair Henry, it really depends what the challenge is. If we want to talk specifically around the municipal jurisdiction, our biggest piece of jurisdiction that we have in terms of apartment buildings, rental buildings, is the maintenance piece. Our property standards bylaw addresses components of maintenance of the components of buildings, both interior and exterior. What we would encourage people to do, and this is a message that we've given to tenants on a very regular basis, is if they have a challenge or if they're experiencing a maintenance issue, please contact your landlord, your property management company, whatever contact you've been given. Particularly or more particularly, we would prefer that it be in writing through a work order type of system. And if they don't get satisfaction through that within a reasonable time based on the types of repairs that are necessary, then they can contact us and we'll do an inspection.
Yeah, and I think that's helpful. The property standards bylaw is a tool that we have to deal with a subset of issues. Give me an example of what a property standards issue might be that we might hear about that we could deal with.
Well, there's a multitude of issues that could manifest themselves inside of a dwelling unit. It could be a plumbing problem, electrical problem, poor ventilation, the existence of mold, ill-fitting windows and doors that are in disrepair and are creating drafts, and it could be problems with the appliances, if depending on the type of appliance, because not all appliances are covered, but some are. Depending on the nature of them. So it's fairly broad-reaching, and it's really it's tied to anything that could possibly fall into disrepair in terms of the components of the building system itself.
Yeah, and if it's an issue that isn't a property standards issue, that isn't sort of building components and sort of those life safety systems and issues, that's not our jurisdiction, right? So in those cases, where is it that the tenant should call if they're not getting satisfaction from their landlord or property manager?
Through you, Councillor Henry, what I would categorize as those other issues are things that might relate to things like key deposits, leases, lease obligations, the amount of rent, abatements for rent for certain situations. All of that is governed at the provincial level through the Residential Tenancies Act, and there is information available on who to contact and how to contact them. We have worked with the students' unions, and will continue to do so in terms of sharing information that they can share with their memberships to make sure they understand who to call for what. So if they get, if those types of issues are reported to the ministry, there is a process through the the Rent Control Board, where either the landlord or the tenant can take action if either side's not living up to their obligations.
Yeah, I think that's helpful background context. And I was wondering, Mark, Councillor Henry, whether this is something that Town and Gown has heard stuff about, or whether there's stuff on Town and Gown's radar for future investigation or work.
Maybe I'll start through you, Chair Henry. Just as recently as our last Town and Gown meeting, the question did come up with students coming back to the community. Were there any issues or challenges that the student leaders were hearing about? And so we did indeed ask that they would put some information together for us. The one anecdotal and Commissioner Dykstra can add a little bit more.
Yeah, through the chair to the council, and specific to your question, Chair Henry, Town and Gown, and I think you're well aware, 2015 and 2017, we've done the studies jointly with the universities and really setting the stage with respect to the supply and demand and some of the issues around that. So taking a pause this year based on some other important study work being done on, with respect to campus life, but that will advance. So we will engage. That's a key theme of work that Town and Gown is focusing on. What is the sort of housing need? What is the supply? And we will work forward, and we'll continue with that. Yes, as Councillor Hanmer noted, that good discussion with the reps from the undergrad associations just last Thursday about the issues around housing. They did note advocacy for any other support legally. UFW is advancing and also reaching out to Conestoga College to offer that same support. So resources are being put in place to support them if there's a specific need as well.
And I think that's a useful message. I mean, one thing that I've spent a lot of time, thinking about since I joined council, and was one of the driving factors for doing that was the recognition that everybody deserves a safe place to live in our city. And we've certainly taken action over time to ramp up those efforts to improve the safety of rental housing within our jurisdiction. What I'm hearing today and is consistent with one of the persistent challenges, which is awareness of where the right place to go is with the right issue. And if we're not having a deluge of data from these places, that reinforces the idea that there's also a knowledge gap and a challenge gap on tenant side. This isn't surprising, but it's an area that I'm glad to hear there's investigation and further focus on, because I think that can really help if folks know their rights, know where to reach out. The city is ready, willing, and able to act, and has acted when it's been engaged on these matters of property standards, and I think people need to know that. Councillor Barnegar?
If I may just add a question into the discussion. I understand that this didn't make it into our records because in all likelihood, the tenants didn't know that they should call us. But we've got the information in front of us now. I'm just curious, what is the city doing, or what can the city do to address the issues under our purview, in light of this release?
Through you, Chair Henry, I can't speak specifically to all the information that was posted. My first comment would be that you have to really look at all of the data. There was a lot of work orders that were posted, and I will qualify my comment by saying I haven't looked at all of the data, but some of the data that I looked at indicated work orders, but did not indicate what the overall response time was. So I think you really have to look at the data to determine whether or not are these work orders that were responded to in an appropriate amount of time or not? And that really, I think that's the issue. And I'm not sure that all of the data shows the whole picture from what the municipality's concerns might be. It's about the response time. But the other thing we have to understand is that based on our levels of authority, we can't go knocking door to door and go into these units without permission. So back to what Chair Henry had indicated, it's important for people to understand what their rights and obligations are, but also who to contact. So what we're going to be doing, and we've done this in the past, and it's sort of a regular business, is ensuring we've got good communication with the two student unions so that they can make sure that their membership is aware of who to call. So if they have outstanding work orders now that are an issue and are still unresolved, they can contact us. We'll do an inspection to determine whether or not it's part of our purview. But the unfortunate thing is the way the legislation and the processes work in Ontario, subject to provincial legislation, is we can't go into these units without being invited first.
Yeah, I think that's Mayor Jaworski.
Thank you, through the chair. Very informational, Shane. So let's say you do go through the unit, you verify what the occupant is telling you. What then authority do we have? Is there probably not a fine? We really just want to make things right. So what authority do you have to ensure that this is rectified?
So once we do, through you, Chair Henry, once we do an inspection, if we determine that there's a violation of our property standards bylaw, then our authority allows us to issue a work order with a compliance time that is dependent upon the type of work that's necessary, obviously longer time periods for more extensive work. If the work isn't done within a reasonable time, as specified in the work order, then we have 2 levels of authority to take it forward. One is we can implement a prosecution against the property owner for failing to comply with the work order, or we can go in and do the work ourselves, or we can make the work happen. I don't carry a tool belt in my car, so we would make the work happen, and then we can bill the associated costs to the property taxes of that particular property.
All good context and helpful information. Other items of new business or questions? I know Councillor Hanmer.
I do have one thing, and this is helping those that are youngest in our community who don't necessarily have a voice around this table, but just to remind everybody that this is Tim Hortons Smile Cookie Week, and the proceeds, it's really exciting, the proceeds go to Nutrition for Learning and to Kids Ability. So I encourage everybody to get out there. They even take orders in advance. You don't have to just stand in line. So it's a good initiative, and children in our community benefit greatly from this cause. So that's it.
Good challenge laid down there, Mayor Jaworski. Councillor Bonigar.
I would just like to make note of a fantastic gathering that was held on the weekend in the McGregor-Albert community area. This was an annual barbecue put on by the neighbourhood to welcome students to the area for the year and ongoing. And as always, they somehow managed to have great weather, so they pulled it off. But it was a really great opportunity to see a mixed community of long-term residents, young families, students, grad students, undergrads, all together, building community together. And I think in light of a difficult conversation that we had around the horseshoe last week, it was really great to see that this does already exist in our community, and we should be proud of each other and of the ability to really make a great city together. We all bring something valuable, and this little event just showed that in spades.
And with that, I see hands going up to move for adjournment. I see Councillor Vasek and Councillor Freeman. All those in favour of adjourning. We received information, and now we're adjourned.